Good morning. Good to see all of you guys. Thank you, Steve, for letting our personal information out. No, I'm just joking. Hey, let's just, today we kick off a brand new series called Participation Award. And for this series, we're going to cover some of the elements that we do on a Sunday morning. We're going to look at why do we sing and why do we preach and why do we take up an offering and why do we do communion and baptism and serve. And we're going to cover a number of these various different topics, but we're calling this Participation Award as a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, because if you remember when maybe you're a kid or maybe you're watching your own kids in sports, their kid, you can maybe skip all the practices and skip all the games, but you still get the Participation Award at the end because you were on the team, right? And here's the honest truth is that we can treat worship the same way. And we can treat going to church the same way. And this is why you can go to church and 99 out of 100 times you walk away no different. There's no change. There's no significant thing that happened to you. You were participating. You got your participation award. You got your pat on the back saying, I'm good with God now because I did what I was supposed to do. But you know that you weren't changed. Maybe you walked out feeling a little grumpy as well, of like, well, that was a waste of my life for that morning, but at least I did what I was supposed to do because I'm a Christian and this is what we're supposed to do, and I'm going to get my participation award with God. But in this series, we're talking about what true participation looks like, and it's authentic engagement with God and His story as a member of His story. So for this series, if you're someone who's like, I just want to go through the motions. I just want to show up to church and make myself feel like a good person and I'm good with God because I did what I was supposed to do, this series is probably not for you. But if you're someone who comes here and your heart is, I want to know God and I want to be in union with Him and I want to have time with Him, a time with Him that will shape me, a time with Him that I'm going to walk away a little bit different because I was here. Because I was with a body of other followers of Jesus worshiping God, then this is going to be a series for you. Because we're going to be talking about what true participation looks like. And for such a challenge as this, we need to soak it in a lot of prayer. So if you would please just bow your hearts with me and let's go ahead and dive into a little bit of prayer. Jesus, you hold all authority. You are worthy of all of our praise and all of our gratitude. You are our life. And so we offer this time to you. We ask that you would open our ears to hear from you. Please speak to us because we come into this time seeking union with you. We want to be one with you. We need more of you, God. Please fill us up with more of you so that our worship is real, so that it's authentic, so that we've engaged in something that we cannot come away from it being the same people anymore because we have encountered you and we've invested in time with you. Not because we're trying to get anything from you, but because we want you. And I'm praying that that might be the heart of this entire series. That as we look at all the elements of things that we do on a Sunday morning, that all of them might be soaked with this one goal in mind, to have union with you, to know you, to be with you. And may it start today. In your name I pray. Amen. So, Jody and I love listening to this Christian comedian named Tim Hawkins. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you've had the luxury of getting to see one of his shows. He's a Christian comedian. He's really good at poking fun at us Christians, which is a good thing. We need to have times to laugh at ourselves because we do some silly and strange things, right? Sometimes as Christians. Let's just be honest about that. All right, so Tim Hawkins came to the town that we were living at in Tennessee, and so we went to go see him. And on that night, he made this joke about the way that we oftentimes talk about churches as Christians. And you may be familiar with this. Maybe you've observed this, right? Where there's a little bit of a hidden code behind the way that people talk about the church, right? So if they brag about one thing, it means they really don't like something else, okay? And that there's a opposite. So if someone comes to you and they're like, man, our worship, the music, the band, they are phenomenal. What they're really saying is the preaching is dull and boring, and you should just ignore that part, right? Or if someone is all they can do is brag about the preaching and they're like, oh, it's so good, what they're really saying is, oh, but the music's terrible, right? Or if someone brags about the children's program and all the children's services, what they're saying is, I can't stand the adult worship part and I look for any excuse to get out, and it's great for my kids, right? That's what they're saying. Or if someone is all they can brag about of the church is the building, what they're really saying is, I don't like being there, I just like the look of the space, right? Strangely enough, what I hear people brag about most of our church is the praise band, and I'm not going to read too much into that, right? No, in all seriousness, we really do have an amazing band up here that week after week are inviting us to join in with them in worship of King Jesus. In fact, I remember the very first time Jody and I attended the church. We were back in the Holiday Inn at the time, and no one knew who we were except for Dave and a few others that knew we were candidates for the position of teaching pastor. And I remember halfway through the service, I think it was around the second or third song, my wife Jody looked over me, nudged me, and she's like, I don't know where you're going to end up, but I'm going to come here so I can hear Stephanie and Allison sing every week. So I really hope you get this job. And at the moment, I was like, yeah, I really hope I get this job too, because I don't know how our marriage will survive if we're in different states and stuff like that, right? But thankfully, that all worked itself out. And we really do have an amazing worship band who week after week are inviting us to join in with them in the worship of King Jesus. And if you're not praying for the members of the worship band, you really should, because there's a lot of spiritual warfare when you stand up in front of a crowd of people and you're trying to usher them into a spirit of awe and reverence of King Jesus. And so if you're not praying for them, they're facing a lot of spiritual warfare when they're up here and throughout the week. You should be praying for them. You really should. As worship, this is something that is so crucial and so very important to us, all right? And it's not just important to us as Jesus followers. This is something that is a core aspect of being human. Now, some of you may disagree with that, especially if you're not a Jesus follower. You may be like, I don't see this. I don't think we're that big into the worship, and that's that important. But we are worshiping creatures. It is our primary function, and here's my argument, is because there's always something that we're worshiping. There's always something that has our chief focus, and it's our chief desire, and it's what we pursue, it's what we seek after, it's what holds our hope, our dreams, our future, our joy. For some, it's a job. For some, it's money. For some, it's a relationship. For some, it's family. For some, it's some sort of success, some sort of accomplishment. Maybe it's your body. Maybe it's someone else's body. We're always worshiping something. We all are having something in our mind, and that's what we pursue. That's what we hold all our hopes and dreams on, right? And it could be an idea. It could be a mindset. It could be a teaching of a celebrity or a podcaster or social media influencer, someone that you follow who promises a life that you want. And they're like, if you just follow these 5 easy steps, you'll get it. And maybe that's what you are worshiping, which brings into the reality that churches can very well be worshiping a pastor over Jesus sometimes. We are people, creatures who are worshipers. No other creature is like this, but we are, where we can have our focus so intent upon something. And it's all we think about, it's all we focus on. Everything that we want in life is wrapped up in it. And we keep telling ourselves, if I can just have this, then I will have all these other things. We are naturally worshipers. But as followers of Jesus, we know that energy, that aspect, that core function of who we are as human beings needs to be directed towards our Maker, towards God, that's what we were designed to do. And that we're not just invited into worship, we're commanded to worship. In fact, there's a book of the Bible known as the Book of Psalms where all of it is worship. And in it says this. It says this command that we have. In Psalm chapter 95, verse 6, it says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before Yahweh, our Maker." When you look and study the passages of worship in the Bible, they're not hey, come whenever you have free time. Come when it's convenient for you. The language is always a command. This is what you were made to do. So come and give all your energy, all your chief focus in life. Draw life from your main primary function of worshiping God. Here's a definition for worship for us for today. Worship involves authentically engaging with God in response to his identity, his merit, and his generosity toward a people who know God, are coming to be known by God, and live to make God known. We are called and commanded to come to offer worship to God. And when we truly, authentically engage with God in worship, we're changed by it. It affects us. We walk away a little bit different because we've encountered with awe and reverence a being far beyond our scope and imagination. Someone who made us to be in his image, to love him, and to love like him. That's why we say, love God, love people. This happens when we worship God, when we not just come and go through the motions, but we come in seeking to authentically engage with God and his story. We come away changed by it. One writer says this. It says, the more truly we worship God, the more we become like him. So when we come to authentically engage with God, we're going to come away a little bit changed. But here's the sad reality. That 99 out of 100 times, we don't really change from our worship. We come in, we go through the motions, and primarily it's because a lot of our focus, even right now, is not really on God. Like, we can be so distracted by other things, like, okay, well, what's this other person doing? What are other people thinking about me? If I raise my hands, will people be uncomfortable? If I keep my hands in my pocket, will they be uncomfortable? Will people think about the way I'm dressed? Or, oh, did you hear about the drama of so-and-so this week? Or does anyone know what I did last night? See, when our focus in church, if you were to probably do a scale and someone were to measure your thoughts and focus on God, I imagine most of our focus and thoughts would be directed towards other people. Not a whole lot on God, even when we come into worship. And so we easily get into a spirit of nitpicking. Oh, I want this preference. I want this song. I want it in this style. I want it to look like this. I want this kind of experience. We make it all about ourselves and not coming as people who our focus is, man, there is a God out there who loves me, who made me, who has called me his own, who has redeemed me, who died for me. I want to come and give him praise and gratitude today. That changes when you come into this room. That changes you when your focus is on who God is. But here's the tragedy. Many times our focus is really not. And many times we come in and we go through the motions, and maybe you've experienced this where you've gone through the motions and you're like, I'm just coming in, I'm just going in. That was an all right service. I left and all right, but then you nitpick about different things. When oftentimes our focus is in the wrong way, no wonder that nothing ever happens. In fact, we can have an amazing service and you can walk away not changed in the slightest if your focus was not truly on Jesus. And here's the aspect, the Bible is so beautiful. It records how often this happens in the people of God and how very common and tragic this is. And so we should be listening because maybe some of these stories are the stories that you've experienced and you walk down. Like, for instance, long ago there was this prophet named Samuel, and God writes this through Samuel. It says, has Yahweh as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. So Samuel's issue in his day where people were like, well, I'm just coming through the motions. I'm just giving the sacrifices and the festivals and doing all these things that I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't really care about following this God and his way from my life. Like, I'll do just enough to make sure I'm good with God, but I don't really want to live in a good way with God. Or look at this of the prophet Amos a few generations later. Amos, oh, this is tough words what Amos says. He says this in chapter 5. He says, this is tough to read, right? Imagining God saying this. I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs, to the melody of your harps I will not listen. That was God talking there. Telling the people of God, I don't want to hear your songs, I don't want to hear your worship, because it's not real. You're going through the motions. Or this next one from the prophet Ezekiel, this one kind of hurt me. Ezekiel is a preacher, and God talks to Ezekiel about how the people who are hearing him preach, how they're responding. So here's what happens. God tells Ezekiel these words in Ezekiel chapter 33, and they come to you as people come, and they sit before you as my people, and they hear what you say, but they'll not do it. For with lustful talk in their mouths they act, their heart is set on their gain. Look, my friends, there are so many more examples we can examine, but clearly, God can have a problem with our worship, and it has nothing to do with styles and preferences or what instruments or what songs are being sung. It has to do with the heart of us as individuals, right? Because here's the thing. We can go through the motion of worship but never truly worship. And the problem is not with our church services and styles, but the problem is always with us. And this was an issue even in the days of Jesus. In the days of Jesus, the people of God at that time had worship down to a science. They were the masters of worship. And yet when God in the flesh walked in their midst, he gave this critique to those who were masters of worship. He said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me." Could you imagine if Jesus stood before you and said those words? Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, Mason, that's a different religious culture. That was mostly a Jewish culture. We are those who are the followers of Jesus. We believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus. We believe that because of his justification, we've been adopted as his children. We believe differently, and so we're in a better position. So that there's no way that these things could ever describe us. And that would be false. Because if you read the New Testament, much of the New Testament was written to correct the worship problem that was happening in the early church. And you look at the book of Revelation, the beginning of it is Jesus writing letters to various different churches telling them, guys, there's a problem here. And so we need to be very careful of not rushing to assume that we've got it all figured out. Or that we've pat ourselves on the back and that we're good with God with our worship today if we have not truly, authentically engaged with God. Because it's very easy to pat ourselves on the back, to judge a church service by an appearance and entertainment, to go through the motions of worship, but never actually engage with God. It's very possible to do that. It's so possible that one of the books of the Bible was written about this. The book of Hebrews is actually the one we're going to be looking at. It's actually not a book. It's called a sermon in reality. And in it is this pastor. He's preaching this sermon of the book of Hebrews to an audience of people who are very similar to us, but they were on a state where the church was facing a little bit of a crisis where people were starting to drift away. And some of it was because of social pressure. Some of them were being persecuted, but a lot of people just were going through the motions. They lost the awe and the reverence that they had when they first became believers. They were just like, yeah, I'll go to church on Sunday because that's what I do. They weren't thinking, yes, I get the opportunity to sit and give praise to God. Instead, they're like, oh, yeah, that's just what I do. And they'd get busy, and they'd start missing time. And these on and on and on go. So the pastor of Hebrews recognized that there's a problem here, that this is how the enemy will tear us away, that if he can't get us to be tempted to leave by all these horrible things, then he'll make us busy. And he'll make our worship dull. And he'll make us nitpick and complain about various little things that in the scope of eternity don't really mean a whole lot. And so the author of Hebrews says this in chapter 10. These really encouraging words. And he says, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. So there's this language of corporate, authentic engagement here, that there's something that happens when we're together and a body together is authentically engaging with God and his story, that something has happened. And notice the language is not, come, let's observe a show, right? Let's just go to be entertained. That's not what he says. But let us come together with hearts and focus to make the most of this time, to authentically engage with God, to have our hearts set on being his people together. That's why he goes on in the next phrase. He says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day draw near. Now, this is not about a pastor who's trying to build up a bigger church. This has nothing to do with stroking his ego and he needs a full room. That's not what it is. It comes down to the principle that there is something that happens when people are together worshiping Jesus. Even Jesus talked about that. That where two or more are gathered in his name, there he is among them. And that this has an idea that you present something valuable when you're corporately engaging with other people who are seeking after God with you. That you present something valuable and you gain something valuable from them. So let's do a little bit audience participation here because I love doing this. All right, I want you to look to someone next to you. It could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be a friend. But look to someone next to you and I want you just to look at them and say, I get something valuable from your authentic engagement in worship. Go ahead and say that. Right. Some of you are really uncomfortable about doing that. You're like, I have to talk to people? Well, you're going to be even more uncomfortable because here's the next one. I want you to turn back to that same person, and rather than say, I get something valuable from you, I want you to look at them and say, I offer something valuable to you by my authentic. Yes. The New Testament describes followers of Jesus as a body, as a building. That something happens when God has redeemed someone. That something happens when someone looks and says, Jesus, would you please forgive me and be part of my life? The Bible says that we are now God's new temple. The Holy Spirit is in our lives. That means we offer something valuable to one another when we're together. That you carry the Spirit of God where you go. So you get a bunch of people who are together, who are not here for the emotions, who are not here for entertainment, who are not here just because it's what I'm supposed to do, it's a Sunday morning, but they come together and they're like, I recognize who I am. And I recognize I have something valuable to offer. And I recognize I get something valuable from others around me worshiping God. Something's always happening in that moment. Because sometimes we come in here to get filled up. Like we need encouragement. We need to be strengthened. We need to look at other people and know that we're not alone. But there's other times as well that we come in and that's what we're offering onto others. That we're reminding them that they're not alone. That we are helping to strengthen and encourage them. That we're praying for them. And it could just be as simple as a smile and a wave and saying, I'm so glad you're here. Or it could be something much more intimate. You offer something valuable when you are together, authentically engaging with God. When you come not for selfish gain, not to pat yourself on the back, not to get a check mark and a participation award with God, but you come as one who recognizes that you are now part of God's big story of redemption and rescue that has been told by those who came before you, that you are the next carrier of that torch and that those you interact with have the opportunity to know that they are loved by God and they are loved by you by your interactions with them. Something happens in that space. Something always happens in that space. The author of Hebrews wants us to recognize that because right after he says these words, he begins the chapter 11 known as the famous Hall of Faith story in the book of Hebrews, where he goes, by faith, this person did this, and by faith, this person did this. And the point of it is to remember we're not alone, but we are now part of a story that God is the great knight. We are the damsel in distress, and look what he has done through people who have authentically engaged with him, who've expressed worship and gratitude. And then at the end of this long hall of faith story, as you read that this person did this and this person this, and you're reminded you're part of this story now. You're writing the next chapter, and the interactions of the people around you and your praise and worship to God when you're authentically engaging with him. The author of Hebrews then says these words in chapter 12. He says, therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Authentic engagement, my friends, in worship is about gratitude. That we're grateful for what God has done for us. That we can't help but to express that gratitude. We're not at church because we're supposed to be at church. But we come as people who are like, I recognize what God has done for me. And I recognize what he's done for me this day. And I recognize what he's done for me this week. Even in the bad days. And I need to say thank you. And I need to express gratitude to him. And then I need to come to a space where I'm still surrendering to him, saying, God, thank you for what you've done. And I surrender what happens next to you. See, that's what authentic worship is. Authentic worship expresses surrender and gratitude to God. Now, here's the honest truth. We cannot authentically worship God and engage with him without God being part of it. And that's what's so beautiful, is that we can come in and humbly ask God, what I'm about to be part of, if you're not part of it, it's going to be fake and it's going to be just empty. And it might look very entertaining, but it will lack the true substance of what it was meant to hold. That's you. And so, God, I need you to truly and authentically engage with you. It's okay to pray that prayer, right? And there's something beautiful that when we come in and you're like, gosh, things are not good right now. Things are hard right now. Things are miserable right now. This is the last place I want to be, but I still come. There's something beautiful when someone is able to still say, I still came because I needed God. And I'm authentically engaging with him. And I'm finding my joy again in the restoration and the hope of my salvation. Because in spite of all the excuses to not worship God, he was still greater than all the obstacles and all the excuses. That's a beauty that we get to have. That's a beauty that we get to share. That's why the author of Hebrews goes on in the very next phrase. He says, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. As we've looked at, it's very possible to go through the emotions and to give worship to God that is not acceptable. But God is seeking after worship that is in true engagement with him and his story. Jesus even talked about this in his ministry. In John chapter 4, he's recorded saying this, but the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. Think about this. God is seeking you and seeking you to truly, authentically engage with him. That's amazing, right? Going on from here, here's what the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 12. Stephanie read this one earlier. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Here's the lessons that we get from all this, my friends, is that we get out of worship what we put into worship. We get out of worship what we put into worship. If you're going through the motions right now, then ask yourself, what are you putting into this time right now? Because you could go through the motions. You can sing all the songs. You can say all the little prayers, but not have authentically engaged with God. But when you desire that and express it and seek it, and come in where your focus is on God and you're not letting yourself to be distracted by all the other many focuses. And you're not like, oh, what is anyone going to think about me? Or what if I need to get down and pray with someone? Or what are they going to think about me? Or does anyone think about what I'm dressed as or how I'm looking? Or if anyone knows what I've done and things like that? Or we're not distracted by, oh, did you hear what so-and-so did? But we come seeking something real. Then it doesn't matter what the worship style is. It doesn't matter all the preferences, because we're seeking to authentically engage with God. And that means in our songs, that we're singing unto God. Not because we're supposed to, not because there are words on the screen, because we're trying to engage with God. See, when Stephanie and the band are up here, we're not singing to Stephanie and the band. Neither is it Stephanie's responsibility to create authentic engagement in us. No one can do that. No one can create that in someone else. Only you can create that in yourself by coming into a space and saying, God, I'm seeking you today. And I want to be changed by my encounter with you today. And as I gather with others, I want that gathering to be in the company of others who are also seeking you, God. That shapes you little by little every time. Here's a couple of practical steps that we can apply to get out of worship, or to get more out of worship by putting some into worship. So here's a couple of practical steps. The first one is probably the most important one. Invest in daily private worship improves our authenticity in corporate worship. When you spend time daily engaging with God in something, it could be a prayer, it could be reading your Bible, it could be seeking something, I don't know what. But when you daily are putting time to have a private time with God, you're going to get more out of the corporate time. And if this is the only time where you are having your focus on God and you're engaging with God and you're trying to engage with your story, it's like going a week without eating with only one meal. Or let's be honest, more like once a month, because that's typically when people come to church, right? You're going to starve like that. It's no wonder so little change happens. It's no wonder that there's so much spiritual immaturity in our world right now. But when we daily invest in authentically engaging with this God, and we do it in private moments, not for the eyes of others, we're going to get more out of our corporate time together. So there's the first helpful thing of how we can get more out of worship. Here's the second helpful advice. Pray before church about your time in church. Get together with your family. I know you're always in a rush to get in the car, hurry, to get to church in time. There's arguments that are on the way, things like that. But what if you just took 30 seconds and you prayed together as a family? Our family does this every Sunday. We've been doing it for quite a while. Of just taking a moment and saying, God, with what's coming up later today, please prepare our hearts now to hear what you have to say. And please shape us, because we want to come to a time where we're seeking to know you a little bit more and to know that we're known by you in return and to live to make you known. It just takes like 30 seconds, but that changes so much when you pray before coming to church, because then it's not another thing on the calendar, but it's something that you recognize you're entering into a sacred space with other individuals who are seeking God, with other individuals that you're part of the body, the building, the temple of God now. It's something sacred, my friends. So we should be praying before that time so that we're prepared to receive from God whatever he has for us today. So here's a third little helpful tip. Wake up expecting to be with God every day. You know, we wake up all grumpy sometimes and we're like, oh, I got these terrible things. But imagine if you woke up in the day and your first thought is, no matter what comes today, I get to go through it with God. And I know he's not going to abandon me. He's not going to walk away from me. His love is going to be constant. When you wake up with that energy, that joy, that changes the day. Get a little bit more gratitude in your step. Because you know, even when it is terrible, even when it's a day on the calendar that you're like, I've been dreading this day coming up, and it's finally here. But you still wake up, maybe have a quiet moment with God, say a little prayer, and you just have a moment thinking, God is going to be with me today. Because he promised as much. And he never fails in his promises. And I know whatever comes, I get to walk through it with him. And that changes things. And that leads into our corporate worship. That leads into more authentic engagement with God. And you're going to find yourself praying more and thinking about God more throughout your day. I promise you that's true. Let me give you another helpful advice. Number 4, be present in the moment with the people around you. This kind of has to do with our corporate time, right? So if you come in and you spend the whole time on Instagram and social media and things like that, you're not really authentically engaging with other people. You know what message you're sending to everyone else? You are not as interesting as the fake people around the world that I can engage with. Right? This doesn't mean that you have to be an extrovert and a social butterfly. I get it. I'm an introvert as well, right? This does not mean that you have to go and shake every person's hand. But it does mean that when you're here, be here. That can mean that maybe you just sit in your seat the entire time, but you can still be praying for the people around you. You can still be talking with gratitude for them with God. Be present in the moment. Be present when you're with people, when you're talking with them. There is a joy that is available to you right there when someone's across from you, even if it's a person that drives you nuts, right? Even if it's a person that you're like, man, this person just sucks the life out of me. But this is a moment that God has arranged, and I get a moment to just show love to God by showing love to them. Be present in the moment that you are in, especially when you come into church, all right? You can be taking notes on your phone and things like that. I get it. But be present where you're at. Because then the people around you, they're going to pick up on that. And something good happens in that. Here's one final one. Encourage someone. Right? Encourage. Look, all of us are fighting a battle that no one knows about. And the people around you are going to be facing battles throughout this week. So use this time of great value. Authentically engage with God by loving God and loving people, by encouraging someone before you leave the room. It doesn't take much to look at them and say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Or, hey, I just want you to know I'm proud of you. Or, hey, I see what you're going through, and man, you are a rock star. Encourage someone. Even if you're like, I could really use some encouragement myself. Sometimes we get what we put out, right? And you find yourself, I need a little bit of encouragement right now, then put a little bit extra energy in being a source of encouragement unto others. Because if you recognize that you need that in yourself, then maybe the person next to you also needs it. So when you're gathering together, yes, we can sing, we can worship, we can listen. These are wonderful things. But also truly, authentically engaging with God means loving the people that God loves. And you're not going to be in the battlefield with everyone this week. But the people around you, they're going to be facing some battles. They're going to be facing some blows. They're going to be facing things that the enemy is hoping will crush them and weaken them. What an opportunity before you leave. So you can run in, not engage with anybody, and run out as quickly as you can. But what if you could just say one encouraging thing to someone before you leave? Look, these are easy ways to get more out of our worship by authentically engaging with God, by being participants and partners with Him in His story, to make this a time that's not going through the motions, that's not another thing on the calendar, not another thing where like, gosh, when is Mason going to be done so we can get to McAllister's, right? But this is a time full of surrender and gratitude and encouragement so that we walk out of here a little bit more like Jesus and a little bit more prepared to look like Jesus and the rest of this week in the community around us. That's one of the values of this. We come in here seeking union with God in our worship, in our praise, in our songs, in our gratitude, so that the person we're going to encounter this week may look to us and see, I see Jesus in that person. That's what we build here. Won't you pray with me? Maybe as I was talking this morning, some of you felt like, gosh, that's me right now. We're going through the motions. I'm just here because I'm supposed to be here, or I'm here because my spouse wanted me to be here, or my kids wanted me to be here. And, I know this God and His story and all those things, but I know I'm not really giving God what He wants. And my worship of Him is not real or authentic. It's shallow. I'm not changed by it. And maybe this morning you're feeling a little convicted. And I want you to know that this moment right now could be a moment that changes everything. Where you start getting out of worship what it was designed to do. And so we're going to pray about that right now. Jesus, I'll be the first to admit that there are times I go through emotions. There are times, I'll be honest, I even wake up on a Sunday morning and I'm like, gosh, I don't want to be there. That's tough. And I recognize I'm the teaching pastor to say that. And yet, I have found so many occurrences in my own life when I set those excuses aside and I come and it's been a moment of focusing on you and praying and saying, God, in the next little bit, I want to truly, authentically engage with you. I want to sing real songs of praise to you right now. I want my heart to really love you right now. That moments like that change who I am. And I know that's true for those in this room as well. And so I'm praying over the next few moments as we're going to wrap up with one final song, that this might be a time that maybe for some in this room who've been going through emotions for a long time, or maybe even just offering worship to God that's in the wrong light, that they maybe been complaining about things or nitpicking about things, or they come in with the wrong attitude of looking for styles and preferences but not looking for you. Maybe this is a time when we can change that. Or together with other followers of Jesus, we're expressing gratitude that you have saved us from our sins, that you call us to be your sons and daughters, that you call us into a new beginning. And maybe for some in this room, they need that new beginning now. So please open our lips to express gratitude to you. Draw our focus right now onto you and shape us and change us by that so that we look a little bit more like you. It's in your name I pray.